Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, welcome to this Tuesday edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, two of the country's biggest municipalities on tenterhooks as their mayors face motions of no confidence. At each other's throats at both localities are the country's biggest political parties, that's the ANC and the DA. At stake, of course, are the lives and livelihoods of a combined 7 million South Africans who need proper service delivery from the more than 85 billion rands the cities of Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay get from the fiscus. Later on, we sit down with the chairperson of the new Presidential Corruption Council, Professor Kachalia. We also say happy birthday to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. We start in Gqeberha, where the High Court earlier today dismissed with costs an urgent application filed by Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor Eugene Johnson to interdict a special council meeting scheduled for tomorrow. And that's where a motion of no confidence against her will be debated. Johnson, through her lawyers, insisted the motion of no confidence did not meet the requirements as it was submitted through an exigency matter. She also wanted the court to declare the meeting that included the item in the agenda as unlawful and invalid. She also argued that the Speaker, Gary van Niekerk, presided over the meeting illegally.
The lawyers representing the Mayor Eugene Johnson argued that Gary van Niekerk is not the rightful Speaker as his party membership of the Northern Alliance was revoked. In their response, lawyers representing the Democratic Alliance and its coalition partners stated that van Niekerk was still a councillor at the time of the meeting, where he presided as a Speaker. The court ruled there was no substantial evidence provided to prevent the council meeting from going ahead.
We welcome the judgment today. I think justice will prevail, or has prevailed today. The motion that was brought to halt tomorrow's council meeting was frivolous by the executive mayor, and it was self-serving. That tomorrow there will be motions of no confidence tabled in the executive mayor, and ultimately the people who won today are the citizens of the city, because our democratic processes have been upheld by the court.
The ACDP is accelerating. I mean, we are glad today that today it's justice. It's justice for the city of Nelson Mandela Bay. We've been waiting for a long time. Service delivery has not been taking place at all in our city. Our city is a mess. Everything is broken down. Vandalism is taking place. I mean, there are water leaks all over the show. It's a water crisis, but we have an executive mayor that is doing nothing. So tomorrow we're looking forward in unseating the ANC.
Attempts to get a reaction from the mayor and the ANC have been unsuccessful. The move to oust the current ANC-led coalition has been in the making since the end of July. That was when the opposition parties in the metro signed a coalition agreement with a view to take power. Lerato Fekisi, SABC News, Gqeberha.
Well, I'm now joined on the line by Luyolo Ngakula, who is the ANC's regional secretary in the Nelson Mandela Bay. Also on the line is Leandra Kruger, who is a councillor with the Democratic Alliance in that council. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ngakula. The court has thrown that application out. What's your next plan? Because it looks like tomorrow is a certainty now.
Well, good evening, Vuyo, to you and the viewers. One, I think we've noted the judgment. I think it does become important to note that the written format of the judgment is yet to be delivered to all the affected parties. So what we do know is that the application was dismissed with costs but around the substantive elements in terms of what is entailed in the judgment that we are yet to be exposed to in order for us to be able to pronounce ourselves to that particular effect. But it does become important to note that the interest of the African National Congress in this particular region and in this city is the stabilization, of both the administration and the political environment as a precursor to ensuring that there's delivery of services. So when the mayor took that particular action and reported to the African National Congress, it was an action which was noted and in essence supported, because our understanding is that, one, what you are dealing with in the city, you are dealing with the Pharisees, who preach peace during the day in the form of the Democratic Alliance and collude with murderers during the night. In this sense, portfolio. That particular meeting, it would have been the DA, which in that council meeting would have said that all items, for instance, which have a financial implication, must be deferred for the next meeting. Noting that the content of those particular items, there was about monies, which now the city cannot spend, about 330 million, which was meant for informal settlements. There was about a fund of about 15.5 million from the presidential employment program, which was supposed to benefit residents, unemployed youths, particularly in the metro, as well as, again, another hypocritical stance from the Democratic Alliance in terms of the posture which it assumed in that particular meeting would have been in relation to the stabilization of the administration, which in the previous council meeting would have been the DA, which would have said and directed through a view in council that the process of stabilizing and employing a full-time executive director in the infrastructure and engineering directorate must be complete because we are confronted with a water crisis. So that particular item was supposed to service in that specific council meeting, as well as it relates to the appointment of a chief operating officer. So this was the content of the special meeting which was convened. These were issues which speak to the issues of service delivery. So now you have a situation wherein now monies can't be touched, they can't be spent, which are fundamentally meant for the delivering of services and transforming the lives of the people because of how the DA chooses to posture in council.
Okay.
So we've no judgment.
Yes, I'll have to stop you there. I'll have to stop you there, Mr. Ngakula. I mean, you are very much a part of the history of just described, but I'm not going to get into that. I mean, for now, I'm going to go to straight to Mr. Kruger. As far as you are concerned, with the case having been decided today, tomorrow's meeting is going ahead, and you are planning to table, together with your allies, of course, that motion of no confidence.
Thank you, Vuyo. I think let me first just touch on some of the elements that Mr. Ngakula mentioned to us. While they seem to have a very short memory of the role that the ANC plays in this institution, the budget items that are mentioned by my colleague, when the institution passed its adjustment budget in June of this year, its annual budget, I apologize, its annual budget in June of this year, which is late. It was presented to council late due to the failure of the mayor to oversee the process to ensure that it was on time. At that stage, we had less than a week left before our budget had to be statutorily passed. As such, as a compromise, the Democratic Alliance reached across the aisle to the ANC and said we would agree to your budget on certain conditions. That condition was that there would be an early adjustments budget drawn within 60 days that would be consulted with parties and that would be able to meet the needs of all residents of the city. What the ANC have done is the 60 days have come and passed, and all they've done is they've brought one or two little budgetary amendments and completely disregarded a council resolution which said there would be an entire adjustments budget. I can give you an example. The northern areas, which is predominantly coloured communities in our institute, in our metro, are allocated 5% of the budget only. The same budget that was problematic for us, which we said we can only support on condition that there will be changes made. So the items, while they appear to come from a place of concern, they are devoid of the historical facts of where they come from. Furthermore, while the ANC seemed to be concerned about stabilizing the institution, the deputy mayor last week, after the council meeting that this resolution was passed, the deputy mayor in her capacity as acting mayor wrote to the city manager and said, all of these items which the ANC are very concerned about, they're all withdrawn from the agenda. So in a spiteful attempt to, collapse the meeting or what it is they're trying to do, everything is thrown out of the window and the items are completely withdrawn. So it is incredibly hypocritical of the ANC to say they want to stabilize the institution when they are the reasons why there is this instability. The judgment of today upholds the democratic processes of our council that says if there is a motion of no confidence, it will be heard. The ANC mayor's attempt to subvert those democratic processes were thwarted today by our courts. Our courts said this is not an urgent matter. There are other processes available to you should you be unhappy with the outcome tomorrow. You cannot preempt an outcome of what will happen tomorrow, and as such, the courts correctly said that they would not intervene in this process.
So what are you and your allies, Ms. Kruger, going to do? What should we expect you to do tomorrow? I don't want both of you to actually go back to what you have just done, because the impact of the toing and froing that has been going on, since this council was elected last year, is well known. More than 1.2 million South Africans are in limbo because, nothing is actually happening. You have a budget of more than 15 billion rands that has to be spent on the residents of that part of our country, and it is not being spent. And the way things are going to go awry, actually, if a proper reading of the intentions of the political players is anything to go by, certainly from what we've seen and heard so far. So I don't want us to go back there. The question now, tonight at least, is what should we expect, Mr. Kruger, from what you guys are planning to do and to what end tomorrow?
Vuyo, tomorrow's council meeting will deal with the items which are still on the agenda. There was a meeting on the 30th of August which did not complete its business. There was an adjournment that will take place tomorrow. There are a number of items on that agenda, whether the mayor has withdrawn them, such as those budgetary items that the ANC appear to be very concerned about. Whether she's withdrawn them or not, we will remain to be seen at tomorrow's item. So there's budgetary items on there. There are appointments that need to be made in this institution, and we are happy to deal with those items at tomorrow's meeting. There is also motions of no confidence in the executive mayor, the deputy executive mayor, and the chief whip. These motions were tabled on the 18th of August. They have met the requisite 10 days notice in terms of our council rules of orders. They have met the requisite prior notice in terms of the legislation, and those will be debated and voted on at tomorrow's council meeting.
Mr. Ngakula, what are your marching orders to your councillors who will be attending that meeting tomorrow?
Well, I think, again, once more, it does become important that I remind the Democrat here that, in terms of the law, adjustment budgets are only passed once in February. I think that is something that probably might just have a slight oversight around in terms of his earlier submission. But in terms of the attitude of the African National Congress, we are the organization with the majority of the ward-based constituency. So we owe citizens of this particular city an account. That is why we've been conducting ourselves, in the space of council in a manner which is consistent with the law, in a manner which is consistent with the principles of good governance, despite the conduct of the DA and its friends. So that is what you can expect from the African National Congress, to be in a space of dispensing with issues which have got an interest of ensuring that, one, there is service delivery in the metro, streets are cleaned, potholes are fixed, water and sanitation reaches the informal settlements, because those are the people that the ANC has an interest around, and that is our core constituency as the African National Congress. So that's why you do not find us as the ANC in a space of acting and conducting ourselves in a manner which is illegal, or which is inconsistent with the law itself. So that is what you should expect from the African National Congress put for you.
A couple of quick ones, Mr. Ngakula. One is, I understand the ANC's provincial executive had a meeting where this matter also came up. What was the decision of the ANC on what should happen going forward? And secondly, I heard you pointing out earlier that a decision of, the court made its ruling, but without, of course, furnishing you with details. Does that mean that you intend still, or you're still hoping that you could still appeal today's decision over the next few hours?
Well, Putvoyo, I can't be a soothsayer. The attitude, one, I think, does become important for us to make this distinction, that it is not the ANC which has actually gone to court. It is the deployee of the African National Congress in the form of the executive mayor, and there is a clear distinction between party and the state. And the ANC, unlike the Democratic
you still give people marching orders. You still deploy people. Those decisions are taken by the ANC. Can we not be technical about this? At least not tonight.
This around the truth, eh?
No, it does become important, that these things are stated for public record, because the ANC is an organization which is undergoing renewal. But the point is that I assume is that once the mayor and the executive is furnished with that particular judgment, we will receive advice on how best to proceed on that particular front. Indeed, you are correct that the issue of Nelson Mandela has been a consistent issue in terms of the agenda items of the African National Congress, not only at a provincial level, but at a national level as well. And I think the ANC is quite clear at all levels, from the lowest level to the highest level, that the interest of the African National Congress is to ensure that there is stabilization of the city, both politically and administratively, because at the center of it all must be the delivery of services. And no other organization in this particular city outside of the African National Congress has that interest to deliver those services to residents of Nelson Mandela.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Kruger, quick one. What really is the point of a motion of no confidence if, as has been gazetted by the MEC of local government in the Eastern Cape, you're going to end up with an executive system in a couple of weeks? My understanding is that the deadline for public comments and other inputs from other people is the 12th of September. So in a couple of weeks' time, this whole fuss will, well, hopefully be over.
Vuyo, let me just touch on one thing, and I hate to lecture my colleague. An adjustment budget.
Can you stop lecturing each other for now? We just want clarity on how both of you are going to proceed from now on. I think we've ventilated these issues for months on end now, and we're still not making any progress because you guys keep doing this.
Yes. So the ANC, I don't know, divorces themselves from their role in government. They say they want to bring stability, but they are the causes of the instability. They are in government right now. So
my question now, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, I really have to move. We have a jam-packed show. Are you going to, I mean, what is the point?
Section 12, yes.
Yes, we have a Section 12 pending. So what then is the point of a motion of no confidence at this late stage?
The fast movement of this Section 12 is the fastest I've ever seen this provincial government to move ever. If they moved this fast when service delivery were concerned, the Eastern Cape would be #1 in all of our indicators.
So what's your attitude towards it?
The Section 12 itself is a last-ditched attempt of the ANC. They see the writing on the wall. They're trying to cling on to power. But that being said, there needs to still be an election of a mayor, an election of a speaker, election of a chief whip. Those are elected by council. So I don't know if the ANC understands quite how EXCO works. So while you might have EXCO seats where you have deployees proportionally based, the election for those office bearers are still done by council. The ANC have been unable to keep their coalition together. Their coalition partners want nothing to do with them based on how they are running the city. The DA has approached them and said, we're offering you an alternative of how we can work together to take the city forward, and not the way in which you were tricked into by the ANC. We can bring real services to the residents of the city. We can bring transparent governance, and we can ensure that for every cent every rand in this city, we get 100 cents of benefits and services to our residents. And that's the fundamental difference between our government and an ANC government.
Okay, let's leave it there for tonight. Thanks very much for your time. Well, we move to Johannesburg now, where things are the other way around. It's the ANC that wants to depose the DA as the fight for the control of the city intensifies. The most popular city in the country is home to almost 6 million people with a budget of about 70 billion rands. The ANC and several small parties aligned to it want to depose current mayor and DA councillor Mpho Phalatse. She has, however, poured cold water on the plan, saying it won't succeed. The ANC Lord Bloc is buoyed after successfully removing the city's speaker, Vasco da Gama, through last week's vote of no confidence. Phalatse says Not this time around.
I don't think they'll be able to. I mean, if I look at their strategy, I think it was very short-sighted. If you understand how council works internally and what would need to happen for them to be able to unseat me at the numbers game at the end of the day, and how I look at their strategy, it looks like they had hoped that after asking the speaker, they would be able to soon elect their own speaker, and they would be able to use the same rogue councillors to beef up their numbers to remove the mayor. Unfortunately, what they did not realize is that all those councillors are actually PR councillors. And so I don't know what their plan is really. It's not adding up.
Well, Councillor Bongani Nkomo is the DA's deputy caucus leader in the city of Johannesburg. Dada Morero is the ANC's Johannesburg region chairperson. They both join us on the line. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time. Mr. Morero, it looks like the incumbent mayor is not buying your story. She says, no ways, there's no way this is going to happen.
No, thanks, Voyo, for the opportunity. Good evening to you, the panelists, and your viewers. Let me just make it clear that it's a motion of no confidence that will emerge against the mayor, the same way it emerged against the Speaker, Vasco da Gama, and it was successful. It will still be successful against her once the motion emerges. I've heard arguments. She's talking about the game of numbers. Yes, indeed, it's a game of numbers, the numbers that they got on the 22nd of November. But rest assured, Royal, once the motion has been admitted on the agenda against the mayor, we will come back to the show. And I hope she'll also accept the invite from you, because at that time, we would have successfully removed the mayor of the DA. And council would have been preparing itself to elect a new mayor of council. So it is, of course, a game of numbers. The same way we removed the Speaker, Vasco da Gama, in 2019, it's the same way we're going to do it once again. We removed him last week, and now we are going to remove the mayor. And we will do it correctly. We'll engage with all the parties, as we had done so last week. So
it doesn't matter to you that from the conversations the Democratic Alliance has had with some of those parties which helped you get the requisite numbers, those people were reprimanded, and that, certainly from what we have been told, is never going to happen again.
No, Voyo, you see the bullying tactics of the DA to even instruct parties that they should expel and dismiss their members who voted in favor of the motion, a motion which was sponsored by minority parties. And what was also interesting, once they voted against Vasco da Gama, they then voted with the coalition on the motion that came after, to demonstrate that indeed their issue at that time was Vasco da Gama. But the DA decided to insult their parties. I mean, they even issued out some poster that talks to those that have betrayed in accordance to the DA. They labeled them as betrayers, when in fact they're not even members of the Democratic Alliance.
Okay.
The Democratic Alliance itself knew that it could only defend this thing through numbers. And why on earth would they want to attack those that have broke rank with them? Because they're not necessarily governed by the discipline and the policies of the DA. They belong to their own parties. But they use their bullying tactics, threatened parties. I don't know what is it that they have on those parties that they were managed to threaten them, and some of them are beginning to process their councillors. They've taken them to disciplinary hearings.
Well, let's hear what Mr. Nkomo has to say about how they have been playing this and what it has or hasn't done for the Democratic Alliance. Mr. Nkomo, how confident are you that what happened last week won't happen again? What have you done since to make sure that embarrassment? You don't suffer the same embarrassment.
Good afternoon, good evening, Bravoyo, and good evening to Councillor Morero. I think he's correctly mentioning it's a game of numbers, but we saw on the day that there were different numbers flying around according to allegations emanating from other councillors of another currency. So we will, I'm sure we'll get to that during the course of the program. But I think, Bravoyo, what has taken place since then is that the multi-party partners have met and have given assurances that they have dealt with the rogue elements within their parties. Councillor Morero goes on about how we have bullied, various councillors various political parties into taking action against their councillors. These are councillors that defied instruction from their leadership to vote on party lines, and these are individuals that have betrayed not only the residents but the multi-party agreement that we have signed. And if I'm to emphasize this case even more, you have a situation with the ACDP where there's 3 councillors as a whole, and 2 of those councillors votes not in line with the rest of his party. You have the IFP, for instance, where one of their councillors voted the opposite to the rest of the 6 councillors. So when Mr. Morero is talking about people being bullied and the DA bullying individual parties, he should take that into consideration, that where there's smoke, there's fire, and we believe that there's fire here.
What fire
have you as the party sort of perhaps looked at how, and this is a question I asked last week as well, at how you've managed these coalitions? What if the people who voted against you in spite of what of the agreements or the arrangements with party-to-party arrangements with the Democratic Alliance, what if they voted with their hearts because of what they have experienced and how you are managing this coalition? I'm not saying that's the fact. I'm just saying, what if?
So, Bravoyo, there are various platforms in which any of those councillors could have communicated the dissatisfaction or their change of heart, for that matter. And one of those instances was a meeting we had just before we voted on the motions. And we got commitment from some of those people that voted in favor of the motion that they are, in fact, still committed to the residents of the city of Joburg. And they are, in fact, still committed to the So if that's the case, then we need to ask the question, why they're not ventilating their issues in the platforms that were available to them? Why were they not ventilating their issues to their leadership? Why were they not ventilating the issues at management level, at technical level, at COG level? There are questions that need answers here, and we are struggling to get the relevant answers from the likes of your Tada Morero.
Mr. Morero, what happens if you don't get your wish in spite of your stated confidence this evening? What if you don't get the numbers? What happens next? Where is this, or when is this going to end?
No, once we don't garner the numbers that we require, we would accept and would move on, and we'll continue to raise issues against the DA, service delivery failures, or any other issues that we think are relevant in representing our constituencies. As you know, that at least the ANC currently has 87 wards, and will continue to raise matters on behalf of our constituencies as long as we are not barred from raising our issues in council by the arrogance of the Speaker, Vasco da Gama, who would ensure that he remained partial and being a DA speaker as opposed to being a speaker of council. As long as we are not barred, as long as we are giving the voice that we require, then we will not necessarily fight that speaker, because we have been given the platforms to constantly raise our issues. And would accept it's a game of politics. And by the way, we have to remind Bongani that raising a motion, a councillors may vote in accordance to your conscience. And in fact, this was the statements that were consistently raised by the DA when they presented a motion against the former President Jacob Zuma. So suddenly, the DA now has a problem with voting with your conscience. So it is important that we remind Bongani that is the same motion of no confidence that was presented against President Zuma.
Okay, Mr. Nkomo, what if you, in spite of your confidence that you've plugged the, loopholes and none of what we saw happening last week with regard to the Speaker, Vasco da Gama, will happen again? Will you accept and move on as Dada Morero is promising? Will it be the case again?
Excuse me for not being confident in Dada Morero's promise, because I think the ANC have a very hostile relationship with democracy, and they've proved that in the past. But I think from our side, if we happen to find ourselves on the opposition benches, we'll continue to do the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years, and being the voice and the mouthpieces of our residents, and obviously being the effective opposition that we possibly can be. And that will also include working with, some of the councillors in council.
Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for taking time to come on the program this evening. Dada Morero, who is, of course, the NC's Johannesburg region chairperson, and Councillor Bongani Nkomo, who is the DA's deputy caucus leader in the city of Johannesburg. After the break, we'll speak to the man who's going to have President Cyril Ramaphosa's ear when it comes to what must be done to fight corruption in this country. Approved about 2 years ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa's new Corruption Council was finally announced last week. It's going to be chaired by Professor Firoz Kachalia, with Inkosikazi Nomandla Dorothy Mhlauli as his deputy. Corruption Watch luminaries Kavisha Pillay and David Lewis will also form part of it. And so will unionist Nkosana Dolopi, activist and researcher Barbara Schreiner, lawyer Nokzola Gloria Kumalo, journalist and academic Tandeka Kubule Mbeki, as well as activist Sikwetlane Pamudi. Professor Kachalia joins me on the line to talk about the task at hand. Prof, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. I don't know what perhaps you can enlighten us, what the president would have, or the president's office would have said when they approached you and said, we want your services for this particular task. Can you remember?
First things first, Vuya, I hope you appreciate my efforts with the bow tie. I simply received a letter informing me that I'd been appointed, and this was after it was announced in the media. So I've had no direct discussion with the president about this appointment. But like other members, I've received the terms of reference. So I've read the strategy, so I've had some idea what we are required to focus on. And we've had one meeting already, and plan to have the next one later this month.
Did that particular meeting perhaps give you as a group, or did you manage to coalesce perhaps around certain areas or issues that you think would top your to-do list, so to speak?
It was a clearinghouse introductory meeting. We met with members of the Secretariat. We were introduced to each other, although many of us know each other. So that's important. I think that this is a strong group. I think we will be able to develop strong relationships, build consensus quite quickly on the focus areas. We did have some discussion along those lines, at least with regard to the process which we need to follow in order to get as quickly as possible to the point where we are clear what we as a body of councillors believe should be the focused areas. So, for instance, at the first meeting, there was quite a lot of discussion about the importance of focusing rather immediately on the position of whistleblowers in our legislative framework. And we meet later this month to get a fuller briefing of the structures that have already been established in the presidency and the government with whom we are going to have to work rather closely. So the Secretariat, there is an interministerial committee on corruption and so forth.
Of course, I mean, you are taking this task on the back of a great deal of unhappiness from South Africans generally, but also from a number of groups, civil society organizations that play in this particular space. I mean, some of whom, are part of, leaders of whom, of some of those civil society organizations form part of your council, because when they looked at the thousands of pages that the state capture inquiry has generated, when they look at the performances of your National Prosecuting Authority, your Hawks and the like, people aren't actually happy with what they have seen.
I think the public sentiment is entirely justified. It's a very healthy development that South Africans are making it very clear that they do not accept political corruption, and that they are determined to ensure that our public representatives and our political leaders take the challenge of eradicating corruption, the different forms of corruption, seriously. Now, and their concerns about the slow pace of investigation and prosecution is, of course, also entirely justified. Although one must point out that in recent weeks and months, there is also clear evidence of movement and progress on that area as well. Now, the appointment of this council, this committee, envisaged in the strategy that was adopted by the cabinet 2 years ago, is but a small step. It has limited powers. It is really, I think, a transitional mechanism that will enable us, hopefully, to take the process of addressing the implementation of the strategy forward. I think I should also point out that it is important, as you're suggesting, that we focus on criminal prosecutions. But political corruption is a much broader problem, for which the criminal law paradigm is rather limited, because there are forms of corruption, political corruption, that affect our development as a society, our economic growth, and the functioning of our democratic institutions, which are not criminal, which do not give rise to indictable offenses, but are nevertheless problematic in a democracy. And so what we need is a broader, multifaceted anti-corruption strategy, which deals with many forms of corruption which are concerning. And so it should be understood that this body although it has a mandate to interact with the criminal justice cluster, is not an investigative body, is not a prosecuting body, and that it has other responsibilities which are as important in the long-term fight against corruption.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Prof, because among the skeptics, who say this is a, box-ticking exercise, we already have mechanisms and bodies that can actually or adequately do what you're being asked to do now. Among those people are people who say, without seeing a marked improvement in how politicians approach the issue of corruption and ethics, we are not, bodies like yours won't make much, if any, progress. Some go on to point to what the president is embroiled in right now. Obviously, I doubt someone like you and some of the people who are going to serve in this body would have accepted this challenge if you weren't convinced that you will indeed be able to make some inroads, at least.
No, look, first of all, I think, as I pointed out, this is a small step. It has advisory powers, not enforcement powers. But it is established to oversee, in some sense, the implementation of what I think is quite properly a holistic strategy focused on but not exclusively on the investigation and prosecution of what one might call criminal corruption. Now, I think the main potential of this body and the people on it are experienced, they've got expertise, they're committed to fighting corruption. All the appointees are people with expertise and of unimpeachable integrity, and with a proven record of a commitment to fighting corruption. So let's be clear that the people on this body are committed to that fight, and I think the presidency should also be given credit for establishing this body. But it's going to be a long-term effort. And I think the main potential is that it has an explicit mandate to interact with civil society, other stakeholders, and the public at large. Bring the public at large and civil society into a dynamic conversation with government. The proven comparative experience is that that is one of the critical success factors. We also have the responsibility, among others, to advise the president based on sound research and to monitor the implementation of the strategy. And so, in the next, in the meetings that we have already scheduled, we are going to be looking, for instance, at the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, which has done amazing work, collected, voluminous evidence, and made very specific recommendations. So we're not starting from scratch. There has been progress, but let's be clear that the fight is a serious, long-term one, because many of the people who are involved in corrupt practices unfortunately have risen to positions of power and authority in our system, and there's no doubt that they will take every action to prevent progress, but the positive forces in our society need to act together with a strong focus to defeat this real and present danger to our developmental agenda as well as our democratic institutions.
Prof, we wish you and your team the best of luck.
Thanks, Vuyo. By the way, Vuyo, the media has a critical role to play as well.
And that's precisely why I invited you here this evening, and will continue to do so. Thank you very much for your time. Of course, Professor Firoz Kachalia, who is the chairperson of that advisory body on corruption that the president announced last week. To this now, 23 years on, and years after its patron is no longer with us, the Nelson Mandela Foundation continues with its mission of protecting and preserving his legacy. On the day of the foundation's birthday, and a time where leadership or lack of is very much a talking point in this country, we thought we could touch base with the foundation's head of leadership development, and that's Werner Harris. Werner, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Happy birthday to the foundation.
Thank you very much, Rio. Appreciate it.
Well, I can't imagine how it has been for the foundation, especially after the former president passed on. Has it been easier or more difficult, even?
Well, it's never either or, right, Vuyo? I mean, in some ways, things became easier once Madiba stepped away from public life and stopped working closely with us, because the frenzy that always surrounded him was no longer part of our daily work. But of course, we lost something that was irreplaceable. And, we still reckon with that today.
Was there a need for, after his departing, to change tack or change focus, given, as you said, the frenzy, that's always around him was no longer there?
The simple answer is no, because Madiba had planned for the day when he was no longer with us. And you might remember, Vuyo, that press conference he called in 2004, when he said to the world, "It's time for me to retire from retirement. Don't call me, I'll call you." That's when we started talking to him about what does the future look like for us as an organization. And in 2007, he gave us a new mandate, which was to promote social justice through dialogue and memory work. And so we were well underway with the new programs that he had mandated in the year that he passed away.
Of course, you have been very active in the space of convening critical social dialogues, whether it's through the annual lecture or other conversations in between, raising sharply human rights issues, taking on some of the so-called civil society organizations, but that are taking the country in a different direction. How easy or tough has that been, given how some, within our country continue to say they celebrate his life, but he was also someone who felt people and their ideas no one should be muzzled or suppressed because they champion, as some have argued, minority rights?
Yeah, it gets tougher and tougher, Vuyo. And most of the important dialogue work we do is in communities. We've been doing work, for example, in the early childhood development space, working with practitioners, government officials, trying to make a system that is not working to deliver what it was intended to deliver. We've been doing a lot of work in the food insecurity space of late. Each One Feed One, we were delivering emergency food relief to communities, but realized that got to find a way of making a sustainable impact. And so a lot of the work we're doing now is about improving our food supply chains, supporting community gardens, that kind of work. And that always involves deep dialogue with communities, and communities are always characterized by different interests. You have to talk to groupings that are often not in agreement one with the other. So, it's never simple.
Speaking, specifically about your particular role you heading the leadership development unit within the foundation. We're seeing the emergence, of civil society organizations, a lot of them led by young people who feel there's no space for them to engage or to show the country what they have to offer. What as a foundation are you doing in that particular space, which, it must be said, is also very seriously contested as well?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the context is one of a society in which there are terrible failures of leadership, and it's not just at the highest levels of the state and of the private sector. You see it at every level: principals of schools, superintendents of hospitals, and so on. I think the most important leadership development work we do, Voyo, is capacity building in the programs that I was mentioning to you. Is that we have to enable practitioners, community leaders to capacitate themselves. We give them, they tell us what they need, and we try to provide the resources that they require. Because without that leadership development work, people's voices are not heard in the same way. Power structures remain in place. So it's critical at every level of the work that we do.
Perhaps lastly, I mean, Werner, I can't resist asking you this, because in addition to, convening dialogues around critical social issues, as you have mentioned, as well as, the grooming, the next layer or layers of leadership, as well as raising funds to further the Trust's objectives. You also have a responsibility for the preservation of the Center of Memory about former President Mandela, which entails or includes managing the archive that documents, his life and times, his works, and writings. You would have seen over the past weekend some reports about the president's daughter, and just very broadly, what your thoughts as the foundations are around those types of issues and how they should be managed, ideally.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Thank you, Vuyo. We're not privy to the details of this particular instance, but
and none of us are.
Yeah, but in terms of the general point to be made here is that for years and years now, since Madiba gave us a mandate to set up a Center of Memory and to begin documenting his archive, our work has been about encouraging all the stakeholders, and there are many stakeholders. There's government, there is three families, there is a party that Madiba was the leader of, is that we should all work together. And ultimately, it's not about making money. It's not about one particular stakeholder collecting materials and holding a space, dominating a space. It's about ensuring that there's access to this incredible archive and all its constituent parts. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes. We don't talk publicly about the discussions that are going on behind the scenes. We always look to find, solutions that are sustainable and where all parties' interests are recognized.
Well, let me thank you for your time this evening, and once again, happy birthday to the foundation. Please pass that on to the rest of the people who work at that foundation, preserving Madiba's legacy. That's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.